She won't be able to live without me. Women are so predictable. Mark's voice drifted clearly from the living room, where he and Chris were enjoying their third whiskey. I was standing in the hallway, holding a tray of appetizers for our Christmas dinner guests, listening as they finalized their bet. $50 says she begs you to reconsider right there at the table, Chris added. Make it $100. She'll fall apart before I even finish handing her the divorce papers. They were betting on my humiliation at tomorrow's Christmas dinner, as if it were some kind of sporting event. The tray remained perfectly still in my hands. 7 years of marriage had taught me that particular skill. How to hold things without letting them tremble. How to keep my breathing even when my chest felt like it was being crushed. How to smile when my entire world was fracturing. I backed away silently and returned to the kitchen, where my mother was checking on the roast. "Do the men need more appetizers?" she asked, not looking up from her basting. "They're fine," I said, my voice sounding completely normal as I set the untouched tray on the counter. That was another skill Mark had unintentionally taught me. This morning had begun just like every other December 24th. Mark was at the breakfast table, scrolling through his tablet while I prepared his usual: 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, and 3 strips of bacon. He complained that the coffee was too weak, though I'd brewed it the exact same way for 7 years. His wedding ring caught the light as he made a dismissive gesture, and I noticed again how loose it had become. He'd lost a significant amount of weight in the past few months, all those new, intense gym sessions he'd started attending with religious fervor. "My meeting might run late today," he'd announced, even though his office was officially closed for the holiday. Last-minute budget reviews before the year end. The scent clinging to his shirt wasn't the one I'd purchased for him. It was sharper, more expensive, chosen by someone who didn't know he got migraines from overpowering scents, or perhaps by someone who simply didn't care. I first noticed it 3 months ago and had even discovered the bottle tucked away in his gym bag. Tom Ford, with the price tag still attached. While helping him get dressed for tonight's family dinner, my fingers brushed against something stiff in his jacket pocket. It was a receipt from Tiffany Co., dated just last week. A diamond tennis bracelet for $3,200. My own wrists had never worn diamonds from him, not even for our anniversary. I tucked the receipt back carefully, smoothing the pocket as if I'd only been fixing a wrinkle. "Do you have to hover?" he snapped, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "It's like living with a shadow sometimes." I stepped back, my hands folding automatically at my waist. It was another learned behavior, making myself smaller whenever his mood grew dark. The apartment had felt especially cramped this morning, though nothing had changed except for my awareness of how much space I was permitted to occupy within it. The doorbell interrupted his complaints about my menu selections for tonight. Jessica stood on the doorstep, my college roommate who'd become successful enough to intimidate Mark. She was holding takeout bags and wore an expression I recognized from our dormitory days, the one that meant she had difficult news to deliver. "Surprise lunch," she offered, though her smile was strained. Mark brushed past her without a word of acknowledgement. "Budget meeting," he muttered, glancing at his watch with theatrical importance. Once we were alone, Jessica set down the food and turned to me, choosing her words with care. "I saw Mark yesterday at Le Bernardin, downtown." That was the restaurant with a 2-month waiting list. "A client lunch," I responded automatically. The client was wearing a red dress. That barely qualifies as business attire. Jessica then pulled a business card from her purse, pressing it into my hand. "My firm handles divorces discreetly. Just keep this. You don't have to use it." The card felt like a lifeboat I wasn't yet ready to board. I tucked it behind the warranty papers in a kitchen drawer where Mark would never look. He didn't concern himself with domestic maintenance. Now, hours later, with our family arriving and the Christmas dinner nearly ready, I understood. I knew why Mark had insisted on the formal plate settings, why he'd wanted both families present, and why he'd specifically requested we eat in the dining room instead of having the casual kitchen gathering I had suggested. He was staging a performance. My sister arrived with her husband, their arms filled with presents and wine. Mark emerged from his office to greet them, playing the part of the perfect host, his hand resting possessively on my lower back as he guided them inside. Chris followed, already slightly drunk, clapping Mark on the shoulder with a knowing familiarity. "Beautiful spread, Ava," my mother said, admiring the table I'd spent hours preparing. "Though you look tired, sweetheart. Are you feeling all right?" "Just the holiday rush," I replied, adjusting a place setting that didn't need adjusting. Across the room, Mark laughed while telling some story about a colleague's incompetence. He had that particular gleam in his eyes, the one he got before closing a major deal or delivering what he considered a devastating insult disguised as humor. Tomorrow, he planned to serve me divorce papers between the main course and dessert in front of everyone who mattered to me, while his best friend recorded my reaction for their private entertainment. I watched him pour another whiskey for Chris, watched them exchange glances heavy with anticipation. They thought they were predators circling their broken prey. They believed I would crumble, that I would beg, that I would prove their theory about women being predictable and weak. But the wrapped box hidden in my bedroom closet told a very different story. Inside lay 8 months of meticulous documentation, evidence of affairs and hidden assets, recordings of cruel conversations, and my own divorce filing, which had been submitted 3 days ago, rendering his theatrical service entirely meaningless. Tomorrow, when Mark thought he would publicly destroy me, I would hand him that beautifully wrapped package and watch his expression change as he realized who had truly been in control all along. But tonight, I served drinks and smiled at jokes, playing the role of the devoted wife one last time. My hands stayed steady. My voice remained warm. I moved through the rooms of this apartment that had become my prison, knowing that tomorrow it would become my liberation. "You've outdone yourself," Mark announced to the room, gesturing at the decorations and food with a proprietary pride, as if he had contributed anything beyond criticism. Though I suppose that's what wives are for. Everyone laughed politely, uncomfortably. My father's jaw tightened slightly. Jessica caught my eye from across the room. Chris raised his glass in a mock toast, already savoring tomorrow's entertainment. They had no idea that the woman they'd bet against had been counting cards the entire time. That while they had been planning my humiliation, I had been orchestrating something far more devastating. Tomorrow's Christmas dinner would indeed be memorable, just not in the way they expected. The car keys slipped into my hand as the valet pulled our sedan around to the hotel's entrance. Mark stumbled slightly getting into the passenger seat, his fourth whiskey finally catching up with him. The gala attendees were still filtering out behind us, and I caught Susan from HR watching through the glass doors as Mark struggled with his seatbelt. "Drive carefully," he slurred. Then immediately contradicted himself. "Actually, drive faster. This night has been a complete disaster thanks to you." I pulled onto the empty street, the city lights blurring past as Mark began his usual post-event analysis. This time, though, the whiskey had loosened his filter more than usual. "You know what Megan would have done tonight?" He shifted in his seat to face me, his breath sour with alcohol. "She would have charmed Robert Thompson instead of cackling like some desperate housewife at a comedy club. Megan." His secretary's name hung in the air between us. He caught himself, blinking slowly, then pivoted with the clumsy misdirection of the intoxicated. "That dress was all wrong, too. Black makes you look washed out. I told you to wear the navy one." "You said the navy one made me look like I was trying too hard," I replied quietly, turning onto Madison Avenue. "Don't twist my words." His hand slammed against the dashboard, making me grip the wheel tighter. "You always do this. Make everything my fault when you're the one who can't behave properly in public." I counted the streetlights as we passed them. 1, 2, 3. Each pool of yellow light marked another block closer to home. Another moment of this tirade endured. 4, 5, 6. Something deep in my chest was shifting, crystallizing like water turning to ice. 7, 8, 9. "You're lucky I stay with you," Mark continued, his head lolling against the window. "Do you have any idea how many women would kill to be in your position? Successful husband, nice apartment, a comfortable life. And what do you contribute? You can't even make small talk without embarrassing us both." 10, 11, 12 streetlights. The parking garage of our building appeared, and I navigated down the ramp in silence while Mark muttered about my various inadequacies. In the elevator, he leaned against the wall, eyes closed, still talking. Mediocre. That's what you are. Mediocre cooking, mediocre conversation, mediocre in every way that matters. And needy. God, so needy. Like a plant that requires constant watering, just to not die. The apartment door swung open, and Mark went straight to his study, to the crystal decanter of scotch he kept on the bookshelf. I watched him pour another glass, his movement slightly unsteady but determined. The alcohol wasn't done talking through him yet. "You know what your problem is?" He turned to face me, glass in hand, leaning against his desk for support. "You think you deserve more than you've earned. You think being married to me makes you somebody, but without me—" He gestured wildly, some scotch sloshing onto his hand. "Without me, you're nothing. A nobody with a useless art history degree and zero marketable skills." I stood in the doorway watching him drink and felt that crystallizing sensation spread through my entire body. My voice, when it came, trembled with something he would mistake for fear. "Maybe we should put something in writing." He paused mid-sip, eyebrows raised. "About our assets," I continued, letting my voice crack slightly. "Since you always say I wouldn't survive without you, maybe we should make it official. So I know where I stand." The laughter that erupted from him was so sudden and violent that he had to set his glass down to avoid spilling it entirely. He laughed until tears formed in his eyes, doubled over, slapping his knee like he'd heard the best joke of his life. "You want to post-nup?" He wheezed between laughs. "After 7 years? Because you're scared I'll leave you?" More laughter, harsh and mocking. "Oh, this is precious. This is absolutely precious." He stumbled to his desk, yanking open drawers until he found a yellow legal pad. "You want it in writing? Fine, let's make it official." His pen moved across the paper in loose, drunken loops. "Let's see. If I file for divorce, you get, let's be generous, 60% of assets." He looked up at me with gleaming eyes. "But if there's infidelity involved, which, let's be honest, would only be on my part since no one else would want you, you get 70%. He kept writing, adding ridiculous clauses, chuckling to himself. "You get the car, the Honda, not the BMW. You get your jewelry, what little there is. You get half my retirement fund, sure. Why not? I'll be making triple that in 5 years anyway." Each word dripped with condescension, with an absolute certainty that this document meant nothing. He signed it with an exaggerated flourish, dated it, then tore the page from the pad and tossed it at my feet. "There you go, your security blanket. Frame it if it makes you feel better. Put it under your pillow like a tooth for the fairy." He finished his scotch in one swallow. "God knows you need something to cling to besides me." He collapsed onto the leather couch, still chuckling to himself. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into snores. The signed paper lay on the floor where he'd thrown it, yellow and insignificant looking in the dim light. I picked it up carefully, as if it might disappear. In the kitchen, I spread it flat on the counter and photographed it from multiple angles with my phone. The timestamp read, 11:47 p.m. I emailed the images to myself, to an old Gmail account from college, and to a new Proton Mail account I created on the spot. I uploaded them to Google Drive, to Dropbox, to iCloud. The blanket from the hall closet was soft cashmere, a wedding gift from his mother. I draped it over him gently, maintaining the ritual of care even with no one watching. His face in sleep looked younger, almost innocent. It was hard to reconcile this peaceful expression with the man who'd just spent an hour telling me exactly how worthless I was. At the kitchen table, I opened a fresh notebook, one of those composition books from the drugstore with the black and white marble pattern on the cover. My pen moved across the pages, mapping out what needed to happen next. Legal consultation, asset documentation, evidence gathering. Each word I wrote felt like laying a brick in a foundation. The city was quiet at this hour, just the occasional siren in the distance and the hum of the refrigerator. I wrote until my hand cramped, then wrote more. Plans within plans, contingencies for contingencies. The woman Mark had described, mediocre, needy, worthless without him, she would have cried tonight. She would have been destroyed by his words. But that woman had been dying for years, suffocating under the weight of his contempt. And in her place, someone else was being born. Someone who understood that when your enemy hands you a weapon while laughing at your weakness, you don't throw it away, you sharpen it. By the time the sun began to paint the horizon pink, I had filled 20 pages. The notebook would need a hiding place, somewhere Mark would never think to look, somewhere that belonged completely to me. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Jessica. I need to see you about that legal matter we discussed. How's Monday morning? Her response came immediately, despite the early hour. My office, 9 a.m., bring everything. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. I sat across from Jessica in her corner office, watching as Robert Brennan, the firm's senior partner, examined the yellow legal pad paper through his reading glasses. His expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight twitch of his eyebrow when he reached the 70% clause. "This is unusual," he said finally, setting the paper down with careful precision. "Your husband wrote this while intoxicated." "Very," I confirmed. He thought it was hilarious, the idea that I might need protection from him. Robert exchanged a glance with Jessica. "We can work with this, but we'll need to reinforce it significantly. Transform it from a drunken scrawl into something that would hold up under the strictest scrutiny." Over the next 2 hours, they crafted language that turned Mark's mockery into my shield. Clauses about emotional distress damages, provisions for public humiliation, penalties for conspiracy to cause harm. Each addition was something Mark would never think to look for because he'd never imagine I'd think to ask for them. "We'll need multiple authenticated copies," Jessica said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "One stays in our vault, one in a safety deposit box under only your name. And I'd suggest one with someone you trust completely." "My mother," I said, without hesitation. "She lives in Connecticut. Mark hasn't visited her in 3 years. Robert stood, extending his hand. "Mrs. Morrison, this document is now legally binding, but I should warn you, if your husband discovers what you've done before you're ready." "He won't." The certainty in my own voice surprised me. He doesn't think I'm capable of this. Back in the apartment, I pulled the composition notebook from its temporary hiding place and found a better one, inside a box of tampons in the bathroom cabinet. Mark would never touch it. He once told me that feminine products were unnecessarily visible reminders of biological realities. I opened to a fresh page and began what would become my meticulous record. The entries started flowing, memories crystallizing into evidence. January 15th. Mark withdrew $3,000 from our joint account. He claimed the BMW needed transmission work, showing me a business card from a mechanic in Queens. But I called the shop. They had no record of our car. The cash had simply vanished, like so much else in our marriage. February 9th. I'd found the receipt later, crumpled in his coat pocket while doing laundry. Lou Bernardine, the restaurant where we'd celebrated our engagement 7 years ago. Dinner for two, $200. Paid while he was supposedly at a medical device conference in Boston. I'd checked the conference website. He'd never registered. The credit card statements told their own story. Charges at Agent Provocateur, the lingerie store on Madison Avenue, for $900 worth of items I'd never seen. Hotel charges at the plaza during lunch hours. $300 bottles of champagne ordered to rooms he shouldn't have been in. Technology became my unexpected ally. Mark had insisted we share locations on our phones to keep each other safe. He'd forgotten that worked both ways. Screenshots accumulated, showing him at addresses that didn't match his stated destinations. His phone's auto-sync to our shared tablet became a window into his deception. One Tuesday morning, while Mark showered, I discovered something crucial. His phone, left charging on the nightstand, was set to never auto-lock when connected to our home Wi-Fi. I could access everything simply by picking it up during his predictably long showers. The screen recording app I downloaded took seconds to install, invisible among his dozens of unused applications. The contact, saved simply as M, revealed itself through their message thread. Megan Chin, a junior account executive in his department. 26 years old, Columbia MBA, ambitious, and clearly unaware that the man texting her heart emojis had a wife at home. Can't wait for tonight, her Tuesday message read. The usual place. Wouldn't miss it, Mark had replied. Tell them you're working late on the Richardson account. I recorded everything, then deleted the app, knowing I could reinstall it whenever needed. The recordings went to 3 separate cloud storage accounts, each with 2-factor authentication he'd never be able to bypass. Wednesday brought an unexpected gift. Mark had forgotten his BMW was due for service, actual service this time, and asked me to take it in. While waiting at the dealership, I discovered the voice recorder I'd ordered from Amazon had arrived a day early. Smaller than a pack of gum, magnetic and voice-activated, it attached perfectly beneath the driver's seat. Invisible, unless someone specifically looked for it. That evening, Mark drove to what he claimed was a client dinner. The recorder captured everything with crystal clarity. She's pathetic, his voice said, presumably on a phone call, completely oblivious. Too stupid to notice anything beyond her little routines. Chris's laughter crackled through the car speakers. Man, how do you stand it? It won't be for much longer. I'm thinking after the holidays. New year, new life. Megan's different. She actually has ambition. Each word was uploaded to my fortress of evidence before Mark even arrived home. Thursday night, he attended another work function. I played the perfect executive wife, laughing at the right moments, asking about people's children whose names I'd memorized from previous events. When his colleague Emily complimented my patience with Mark's demanding schedule, I responded with practiced grace. Marriage is about compromise, I said, the words tasting like ash. Supporting each other's dreams. Mark overheard and actually reached over to pat my head, like rewarding a well-trained pet. She's finally learned her place, he told Emily with a chuckle. Only took 7 years. My hands remained visible on the table, fingers relaxed around my wine glass stem. But underneath, my legs were pressed together so tightly that my muscles ached the next morning. Emily's uncomfortable expression told me she'd noticed more than Mark realized. Another witness to add to my mental list. Friday afternoon, while Mark was at a real meeting, I visited the Chase branch downtown. The safety deposit box cost $80 a year, paid from my personal checking account that still received small deposits from freelance editing work I did quietly. Inside that metal box, I placed the authenticated copy of our post-nuptial agreement, alongside USB drives containing every piece of digital evidence I'd gathered. The key went onto my keychain, disguised among the others. Just another piece of metal Mark would never question, never examine, never think twice about. Like so much of my life, it hid in plain sight. That night, I made his favorite dinner, ribeye with béarnaise sauce, roasted vegetables, the expensive wine from the locked cabinet. He ate while scrolling through his phone, occasionally making sounds of approval. I watched him from across the table, this man who thought he knew exactly who I was, who believed he'd beaten me into submission. He had no idea that every cruel word was being cataloged, every deception documented, every affair time-stamped and archived. The woman he saw, quiet, compliant, shrinking, was just another performance. The real work happened in the spaces he never thought to look. Saturday morning brought the call I'd been dreading since Christmas. My mother's voice was soft on the phone, careful in the way people are when delivering news they know will hurt. Grandma Helen passed peacefully in her sleep last night. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table while Mark read his iPad in the living room, completely unaware of the conversation happening 20 feet away. The funeral would be Wednesday in Connecticut, a small service, family only. My grandmother had been precise about her wishes, as she'd been precise about everything in her 91 years of life. "I'll be there," I told my mother, already knowing Mark wouldn't come. When I told him about the funeral, he barely looked up from his screen. "Send flowers from both of us. I have that Miller deal closing this week." Wednesday's service was quiet and dignified, exactly as Grandma Helen would have wanted. Afterward, her lawyer pulled me aside in the parking lot of the funeral home. Mr. Davis had handled her affairs for 30 years, and his expression was carefully neutral as he handed me an envelope. "Your grandmother left specific instructions," he said. "The contents of this are for you alone. She was quite clear about that." Inside the envelope was a check that made my breath catch. $85,000, a lifetime of careful saving, modest living, and shrewd investments. There was also a note in her spidery handwriting. "For my Ava, your freedom fund. Don't let anyone clip your wings." Mark never asked about the inheritance. When I returned from Connecticut, he simply assumed what he always assumed about my family, that they had nothing worth having. I told him she'd left me some costume jewelry and old photo albums, and he'd made a dismissive sound before returning to his phone. The next morning, I opened a checking account at a bank Mark didn't use. The account was mine alone, the statement sent to a post office box I'd rented near Jessica's office. The money sat there quietly while I researched, planned, and finally found what I was looking for. The building we lived in was for sale. Jessica's firm helped me establish an LLC, Helen Holdings, named for my grandmother. The purchase happened quickly and quietly. The previous owner was eager to sell, wanting to retire to Florida. Our apartment was rent-controlled, the lease in Mark's name alone, since he'd insisted on handling all our financial matters. He would never know his wife had become his landlord. Meanwhile, Mark's behavior grew bolder with each passing week. My apparent submission had made him careless. He stopped bothering with excuses for his absences. Client dinner became his automatic response, delivered without even looking at me. He'd come home at midnight, sometimes later, his clothes carrying a perfume that wasn't mine, his collar sometimes bearing the faintest trace of lipstick. The watches began appearing in April. First a Rolex Submariner, then an Omega Speedmaster. Each one cost more than the cooking classes I'd mentioned wanting to take at the Institute of Culinary Education downtown. "We need to be smart about money," he'd said when I'd brought up the classes. $800 to learn something you can find on YouTube? That's wasteful. This from the man wearing a $15,000 watch to eat cereal. His birthday dinner in early May became another performance of his casual cruelty. We'd invited 3 couples from his office to celebrate at an upscale steakhouse. Between the appetizers and the main course, after his 3rd martini, Mark decided to share his philosophy on marriage. "The key is consistency," he announced, gesturing with his fork. "Like training a dog, really. Clear boundaries, immediate corrections for bad behavior, rewards for compliance." His colleague Michael laughed uncomfortably. "You're joking, right?" "Not at all," Mark continued, warming to his theme. "Ava here used to have all sorts of ideas, book clubs, art classes, constant social plans. But now she understands her role. Took time, but consistency works." Michael's wife, Linda, looked at me with a horror barely concealed behind her polite smile. I smiled back serenely, cutting my steak into precise, even pieces. "Marriage is about understanding each other," I said quietly, "and I understand Mark perfectly." He completely missed the edge in my voice, too pleased with himself to notice. Mother's Day arrived 2 weeks later. Mark left early for what he claimed was an emergency golf game with a client. While he was gone, I went through his briefcase, a routine check that had become part of my evidence gathering. Inside, tucked between quarterly reports, was a receipt that made me pause. Tiffany Co. $3,000 for a diamond pendant necklace, dated the previous weekend when he'd supposedly been at a medical conference in Chicago. I had checked the hotel confirmation myself. He'd never checked in. I photographed the receipt from multiple angles, adding it to the encrypted folder on my phone. Then I tucked it back exactly where I'd found it, ensuring the briefcase looked undisturbed. When Mark returned that evening, I had dinner waiting: salmon with dill sauce, asparagus, the white wine he preferred. I asked about his golf game with practiced interest, listening to him lie about bogeys and birdies with clients who probably didn't exist. "The Miller deal is getting complicated," he mentioned casually over dessert. "If I get this promotion to senior partner, it'll mean some sacrifices. Longer hours, more travel." His eyes gleamed with something I recognized: plans being made without me, a future I wasn't meant to be part of. "Whatever you need," I replied, refilling his wine glass. "I'm here to support you." He actually smiled at that, reaching over to pat my hand condescendingly. That's my good girl. Memorial Day weekend brought the Millers' annual barbecue. Mark insisted we attend, wanting to network with potential clients. The afternoon was typical, Mark holding court with his stories while I helped in the kitchen, invisible until needed. Chris arrived already 3 beers deep, his usual swagger amplified by the alcohol. He cornered me by the dessert table while Mark was across the yard, gesturing animatedly about some deal he'd closed. "You know, Mark's lucky," Chris slurred, leaning too close, "having someone like you who's so oblivious to what's obvious." "What's obvious?" I asked, arranging cookies on a platter with steady hands. He laughed, the sound ugly and knowing. "Megan, from his office. She's something else. Young, hungry, going places. Not that you're not great," he added hastily, "but Megan's different." Mark appeared suddenly, his hand firm on Chris's shoulder. "Let's get you some water, buddy." They exchanged a look, Mark's sharp with warning, Chris's guilty with realization. As Mark steered him away, Chris stumbled, mumbling apologies I wasn't meant to hear. I continued arranging desserts, mentally adding Chris to my list. Another person who knew, another witness to what Mark thought was his secret. They all assumed my ignorance because it was easier than considering the alternative, that I knew everything and was choosing to wait. The dessert plates from the barbecue were barely washed when June arrived with its suffocating heat. Summer stretched ahead, but all I could think about was December. The countdown had begun in my mind. 7 months until Christmas, 7 months to prepare for what Mark didn't know would be his final performance. It was mid-December, exactly 2 weeks before Christmas, when the universe handed me the confirmation I needed. Mark had been on a conference call in his study, pacing as he always did during important conversations. His laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, where he'd been reviewing spreadsheets over breakfast. The screen hadn't locked yet. I was wiping down the counters when I saw the email draft folder notification, one unsent message. My hand hesitated over the trackpad for just a moment before clicking. The subject line read, "Christmas Dinner Entertainment." The recipient, Chris. The message made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. Christmas dinner is perfect. Her whole family will be there to watch her fall apart. She'll beg me to reconsider in front of everyone. It'll be priceless. Already filed the papers last week. She's getting served right at the table. Make sure you record it. This is going to be better than when Tom surprised Michelle with those photos at Thanksgiving. My hands didn't shake as I pulled out my phone and photographed the screen from multiple angles. I forwarded the screenshots to my secure email, to Jessica's work account, to the cloud storage that had become my digital vault. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m., December 11th. I closed the draft and returned to cleaning, my movements automatic while my mind raced. Tom and Michelle were Chris's friends who'd divorced last year after he'd publicly humiliated her, with evidence of an affair she hadn't committed. They'd laughed about it, made it into dinner party entertainment. Now I was meant to be the sequel. The next morning, I sat in Jessica's conference room while she and Robert Brennan reviewed the email evidence. Jessica's face had gone pale when she'd read it, but Robert's expression had turned calculating, the look of a lawyer who'd just been handed a winning case wrapped in ribbon. "This changes everything," Robert said, pulling up the post-nuptial agreement on his laptop. "Premeditated emotional distress, conspiracy to cause harm, public humiliation with malicious intent. We can add amendments based on this evidence." "But he's already filed," I said, though the words felt distant, like someone else was speaking them. "That's why we're filing yours today, December 21st, 3 days before Christmas Eve. According to the post-nuptial agreement, whoever files first determines the asset division terms, 70% to you, plus damages for emotional distress." Robert prepared the paperwork while Jessica held my hand under the table, her thumb brushing over my knuckles in silent support. By noon, my divorce petition was filed, stamped, and officially recorded. Mark's theatrical service would be meaningless, legal theater with no legal standing. The next 3 days passed in a strange fog of hyper-awareness. I went Christmas shopping with the same methodical precision I'd applied to evidence gathering. At Nordstrom, I found the navy cashmere sweater Mark had admired in October, running my fingers over the soft fabric while imagining his face when he opened the gold box instead. The tree shopping felt surreal. Mark insisted on a 7-foot Fraser, perfectly symmetrical, while I nodded and smiled and helped tie it to the car roof. He had no idea he was decorating for his own downfall. "You seem focused," he commented that evening as I addressed Christmas cards at the dining table, almost manic about these preparations. I looked up at him with practiced concern. "I just want everything to be perfect. Both families together, our first Christmas in the apartment since the renovation. It should be memorable." He smirked, the expression that used to make me feel small. "Oh, it'll be memorable?" The market was chaos 3 days before Christmas, but I moved through it with purpose. The 20-pound turkey ordered weeks ago, fresh cranberries for homemade sauce, the expensive wine Mark preferred, though he wouldn't be drinking much of it after dinner. Every item crossed off my list was one step closer to the finale. That evening, while Mark watched football highlights, I assembled my counterstrike. The gold wrapping paper had been chosen carefully, heavy, expensive, the kind that whispered wealth and importance. The red velvet bow was more than practical, but this wasn't about practicality anymore. Inside the box, I arranged the documents with precise care. The notarized post-nuptial agreement on top, every page authenticated and stamped. Below that, the forensic accounting Jessica's firm had conducted, revealing the offshore account in the Caymans Mark thought was invisible. $170,000 hidden away, probably his escape fund. Next came the printed messages with Megan, organized chronologically. His poetry about her ambitious spirit, his complaints about his deadweight wife. The photographs from his phone showing them at restaurants, her wearing the Tiffany necklace I'd never received. The USB drive containing his recorded conversations went into a small velvet pouch, his voice calling me pathetic, stupid, worthless. Chris laughing along, making their own plans for after the holidays. All dated, all authenticated, all perfectly legal since New York was a one-party consent state for recordings. The final document made me pause. My own divorce filing dated December 21st, 3 days before this Christmas Eve dinner, where he planned to destroy me. The papers that made his entire performance meaningless. I sealed the box with surgical precision, each fold of paper sharp enough to cut. The bow was centered perfectly, the ends curled just right. It looked like a gift, because that's exactly what it was. The gift of truth, wrapped in consequence. I carried it to the dining room and placed it carefully beneath my chair, pushed far enough back that it wouldn't be visible, but close enough to reach at the perfect moment. The dining table was already set with the good china, the silverware my mother had given us as a wedding gift, the crystal glasses that sang when you flicked them. Standing in the doorway, I surveyed the stage for tomorrow's performance. Mark thought he was the director of this show, that he'd cast me as the broken wife who would provide entertainment for his audience. He had no idea the script had been rewritten, the roles reversed, the ending changed. Tomorrow, both our families would gather around this table. Tomorrow, Mark would stand with his envelope and his practice speech. Tomorrow, he would learn that the woman he'd bet would fall apart had been rebuilding herself into something he'd never expected, something stronger than his cruelty, something sharper than his contempt, something patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Christmas morning arrived with deceptive beauty. Snow fell gently outside our apartment windows, while I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection. The woman looking back wore careful makeup and a burgundy dress Mark had approved of months ago. I practiced my surprised expression one more time. Eyes widening, mouth slightly open, the perfect portrait of shock that would soon transform into something else entirely. "Ava, your parents are here," Mark called from the living room, his voice carrying that particular note of impatience he used when performing domesticity. My mother enveloped me in a hug that smelled of cinnamon and her familiar perfume. "You look wonderful, sweetheart," she said, pulling back to study my face. "There's something different about you. You seem lighter, somehow." If only she knew the weight I was about to shed. The apartment filled quickly. Mark's parents arrived bearing wine and unnecessary advice about turkey preparation. My sister Laura came with her husband Kevin and their twin boys, who immediately gravitated toward the tree and its carefully wrapped presents. Jessica arrived last, officially my +1, since Mark had mentioned at Thanksgiving that I needed supervision at social events to prevent my embarrassing tangents. "Merry Christmas," Jessica said, handing me a bottle of champagne while giving me a look that said she was ready for whatever came next. Mark emerged from the bedroom wearing the navy cashmere sweater I'd given him that morning. He'd opened it with perfunctory thanks before returning to his phone, where he'd been texting constantly since dawn. The sweater fit perfectly, transforming him into the image of a devoted husband celebrating with family. Chris arrived 30 minutes before dinner, already slightly flushed from pre-gaming. He hugged Mark with the enthusiasm of conspirators, his phone visible in his shirt pocket, camera lens positioned outward. He'd even worn a shirt with a chest pocket specifically for this purpose. "Smells amazing in here," Chris announced too loudly, winking at Mark. "This is going to be a dinner to remember." The dining table gleamed with inherited china and crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier. Everyone found their assigned seats while I carved the turkey. My hand steady despite the electricity running through my veins. The gold box waited beneath my chair, patient as a predator. "Before we start," my father said, raising his glass, "I want to thank Ava for bringing us all together. This table, this meal, this family moment, it's perfect." "Well, she's had plenty of practice," Mark interjected, his tone light but edged. "What else would she do with her time?" My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I touched his hand gently under the table. "Wait," the gesture said. "Just wait." The conversation flowed with the wine, stories overlapping as families do when gathered. Mark held court with tales from his office, each one subtly highlighting my supposed incompetence. The story about the time I'd confused his boss's name, the incident where I'd worn the wrong dress to a client dinner, each anecdote designed to paint me as a burden he graciously carried. "Marriage is about patience," Mark said, cutting into his turkey with precision. "Some people contribute financially. Others contribute, well, other things." He smiled at me across the table. "Ava keeps the home fires burning while I do the heavy lifting." Laura's husband, Kevin, shifted uncomfortably. My mother's smile became fixed. But Jessica watched with the calm attention of someone taking mental notes, her lawyer's instincts engaged. As plates emptied and conversation lulled, I saw Chris adjust his phone in his pocket, angling it toward my seat. Mark's eyes met his briefly. A moment of confirmation. The show was about to begin. Mark stood slowly, deliberately, tapping his champagne flute with a butter knife. The crystal sang, commanding attention from everyone at the table. My nephew stopped fidgeting. My mother set down her wine glass. "Before we serve dessert," Mark announced, his voice carrying the authority he used in boardrooms, "I have something special for my wife." He reached into his jacket with theatrical precision, pulling out a white business envelope. No bow, no card, just stark white paper that seemed to glow under the chandelier. He walked around the table with measured steps, building suspense like a magician preparing his greatest trick. "This has been a long time coming," he said, placing the envelope in front of me with a flourish. The room held its breath as I opened it. Inside were divorce papers, meticulously prepared, with yellow highlighter marking specific sections. Assets, none. Spousal support, none. Terms, immediate evacuation of the apartment. Mark had even highlighted the clause about abandonment of property rights, apparently forgetting certain drunken signatures on legal pads. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's fists clenched on the table. Laura gasped audibly. Even Mark's parents looked stunned, his mother's pearls trembling at her throat as she processed what her son had just done. "Merry Christmas, darling," Mark said, his smile wide with anticipated victory. I looked at the papers for a long moment, then up at Mark's expectant face, that smug expression I'd seen 1,000 times before. Chris's phone was perfectly positioned, ready to capture my breakdown for their later entertainment. "Thank you," I said calmly. "This is perfect timing." Mark's smile flickered just slightly. I picked up the gold pen Jessica had given me for my birthday. Heavy, expensive, the kind of pen that makes signatures feel significant. My name flowed across the signature line in one smooth motion. No hesitation, no tears, no begging. "Your turn," I said, reaching beneath my chair for the gold-wrapped box. The weight of it felt satisfying as I slid it across the table toward him. Mark's confidence wavered but held. He probably thought it was some pathetic attempt at reconciliation, jewelry or love letters or something equally desperate. His hands tore at the gold paper with less finesse than he'd displayed moments ago. The velvet ribbon fell away. The box opened. I watched his face change as he recognized the first document, the post-nuptial agreement, notarized and binding. His eyes scanned frantically, catching on the 70%, the clauses about infidelity, the provisions for emotional distress he'd never bothered to read when he drunkenly signed it. "What is this?" His voice had lost its commanding tone. "Keep reading," I suggested, taking a sip of champagne. The forensic accounting report came next, revealing the offshore account, the hidden credit cards, the money siphoned from our joint accounts into his private ones, then the printed messages with Megan, each one time-stamped and authenticated, the photographs from his phone showing them together at restaurants, her wearing jewelry I'd never received. Chris's phone drooped in his pocket, forgotten. The recording he'd planned was suddenly evidence of a very different story than they'd scripted. Mark's hands shook as he reached the USB drive in its velvet pouch. A small note attached read, "Your greatest hits. Every cruel word recorded." But the final document was what drained all color from his face. My divorce filing dated December 21st, 3 days before this moment. According to the post-nuptial agreement he'd signed, whoever filed first determined the asset division. 70% to me, plus damages for emotional distress, plus the apartment he loved so much. The silence that followed stretched like a held breath. Mark's face had gone from confident to confused to completely drained of color in the span of 30 seconds. The papers trembled in his hands as he flipped through them again, as if reading them a second time might change their contents. "This can't be legal," he said, his voice cracking on the last word. "You tricked me. I was drunk." Jessica spoke for the first time since dinner began, her voice carrying professional authority. "Voluntary intoxication doesn't invalidate a contract in New York State. You wrote the terms yourself. You signed it, you dated it. The handwriting analysis will confirm it's yours." Mark's mother leaned forward, her carefully maintained composure finally breaking. "Maxwell, what is this? What have you done?" "It's nothing," he stammered, trying to close the box, but the documents had already spilled across the table. A photograph of Megan wearing the Tiffany necklace slipped out, landing face up between the gravy boat and the cranberry sauce. My father reached for the photograph, studying it for a moment, then looked at Mark with an expression I'd never seen before, pure contempt. "You plan to humiliate my daughter at Christmas dinner?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "You brought us here to watch?" "It wasn't. I didn't." Mark's usual eloquence had abandoned him entirely. Chris fumbled with his phone, trying to delete the recording he'd been making. His fingers slipped on the screen, and suddenly Mark's voice filled the room from the tiny speaker. "She'll fall apart before I even finish handing her the divorce papers." Jessica cleared her throat. "I'd be careful about deleting that, Chris. Destroying evidence of conspiracy to inflict emotional distress could make things worse for you legally." Chris's face went pale. He set the phone down like it might explode. I stood slowly, beginning to clear the dinner plates with the same calm precision I'd maintained all evening. Mark watched me with wild eyes. "You set me up," he whispered, the reality finally penetrating his ego. I paused beside his chair, my voice conversational. "You set yourself up. I just documented it." I picked up his barely touched plate, the expensive turkey growing cold. "Oh, and Mark? That apartment you love so much? The one you insisted we rent instead of buy because real estate is a bad investment?" His eyes widened further, if that was possible. "I bought the building 6 months ago through an LLC, Helen Holdings, named after my grandmother who left me the money you thought was just costume jewelry." I smiled, the expression finally genuine. "Your eviction notice is in that portfolio, too. 30 days. The room erupted. Mark's mother stood so quickly her chair scraped against the hardwood. "You bought the building? With what money?" "Maxwell, explain this immediately." My mother remained seated but reached for my hand as I passed, squeezing it with fierce pride. Laura's husband Kevin actually laughed, a short, shocked sound. "She owns the building. She's your landlord." "Oh my God, this is insane," Mark sputtered, standing up, his chest heaving. "You can't do this. I'll fight it. With what?" I asked calmly, continuing to stack plates. "The offshore account in the Caymans? The one you thought I didn't know about? That's frozen pending the divorce settlement. Your lawyer can explain how financial fraud during marriage proceedings works." Jessica pulled out her phone, typing quickly. "I'm sending you the contact information for 3 excellent divorce attorneys. Mark, you'll need one by Monday. The court date is already set for January 15th. Mark's father, who had been silent throughout dinner, finally spoke. "How long have you known about the affair?" 8 months, I replied, moving toward the kitchen with my stack of plates. The same day he drunkenly signed that post-nuptial agreement, actually. 8 months, Mark's mother repeated faintly. "You've been planning this for 8 months?" I paused in the doorway, looking back at the table. "No, Mrs. Morrison. I've been collecting evidence for 8 months. The planning started much earlier. Around the time your son told a room full of his colleagues that training a wife was like training a dog." She closed her eyes, her hand moving to her pearl necklace. "You recorded me?" Mark's voice had risen to near hysteria. "In my own car?" "One-party consent state," Jessica said mildly. "Completely legal. Every cruel word, every conversation with Chris about your post-divorce plans, every call to Megan where you called your wife pathetic, all admissible." I returned from the kitchen to find Mark frantically texting on his phone. Probably Megan, though she wouldn't answer. I'd sent her an anonymous tip that morning about his married status, along with screenshots of his messages to other women, the ones where he'd called her entertaining but replaceable. "She's not answering, is she?" I observed, beginning to collect the wine glasses. Mark's head snapped up, his face contorted with rage. "You contacted her?" "Someone did, anonymously. Thought she deserved to know she was dating a married man who was planning to trade her in within a year. just like you did with me." My nephew Liam, only 7, tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Why is Uncle Mark crying?" Because he was. Tears of frustration, of rage, of humiliation were streaming down his face as the full scope of his situation became clear. The confident man who'd stood up with divorce papers 10 minutes ago had crumbled completely. "We should go," Mark's father said quietly, helping his wife to her feet. "Maxwell, get your things." "But Dad..." "Now." The authority in his father's voice brooked no argument. Mark stood on shaky legs, looking around the room at the family he'd assembled to witness my destruction. Every face reflected the same thing back at him: disgust, disappointment, or in Jessica's case, professional satisfaction. "You were so sure I'd fall apart," I said, quoting his own words back to him. "So certain I'd beg. Women are so predictable, you said." Mark flinched, as if I'd slapped him. "The only predictable thing here," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "was your assumption that I hadn't been keeping score, that I was too stupid, too weak, too dependent to protect myself." Chris had edged toward the door, trying to escape unnoticed. My father stepped into his path. "The recording," my father said quietly. "Delete it now, in front of everyone." Chris's fingers shook as he complied, showing the screen to prove it was gone. "There are copies in the cloud," he admitted miserably. "Delete those too," Jessica instructed. "I'll need confirmation they're all destroyed by tomorrow morning, or we'll discuss conspiracy charges." Within 40 minutes, Mark had packed a suitcase under his mother's withering supervision. She stood in the doorway of our bedroom, my bedroom now, arms crossed, occasionally making sharp comments about his choices. "That poor girl, Megan," she said at one point, 26 years old. "Your secretary, Maxwell? Could you be more cliché?" He didn't respond, just shoved clothes into his bag with increasing violence. When he finally emerged, pulling his suitcase behind him, the family was still gathered in the living room. My family, I realized. The ones who'd stay, who'd help me reclaim this space. Mark paused at the door, turning back to look at me one last time. "This isn't over." "Yes," I said simply. "It is." The door closed behind him with a decisive click. Through the window, I watched him load his suitcase into an Uber, his parents already gone. Chris nowhere to be seen. The snow was still falling, covering his footprints almost immediately. My mother appeared beside me, wrapping her arm around my waist. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered, "but I never imagined you were this strong." I stood with my mother at the window for a long moment, watching the snow erase Mark's footprints from the sidewalk below. The apartment felt different already, as if the walls themselves could finally exhale after holding their breath for 7 years. "We should eat the dessert," Laura said quietly from behind us. "Seems a shame to waste that pie after everything." The absurdity of it made me laugh, a real laugh that started deep in my chest and bubbled up without permission. Soon my mother was laughing too, then Laura, then even the twins, who didn't understand what was funny but wanted to be part of it. We sat around the table that had just witnessed my liberation, eating apple pie and vanilla ice cream as if explosive family revelations were standard Christmas fare. The next morning, December 26th, I woke to 17 missed calls from Mark. I blocked his number without listening to the voicemails. By noon, Jessica texted me. Mark tried to access the joint account. It's frozen per court order. His personal account has $2,400. His lawyer just called me screaming. The studio apartment Mark found was in Queens, 40 minutes from his office, above a 24-hour laundromat. His BMW was repossessed on day 3 when the forensic accounting revealed he'd been 3 months behind on payments, using our joint funds to maintain the illusion while funneling his salary elsewhere. He took the subway now, the same system he'd called public transportation for people without ambition. Megan's response was swifter and more brutal than mine. The anonymous tip I'd sent included screenshots of Mark's messages to other women, his comments about her being fun for now, and the recording where he'd told Chris she was entertaining, but ultimately replaceable. She didn't just block him, she reported him to HR for inappropriate workplace relationships. By New Year's Day, Mark was on administrative leave pending investigation. The video found its way to Mark's employer through channels I genuinely didn't control. Chris, terrified of legal consequences, had shared it with his girlfriend to explain why he'd come home shaken on Christmas. She'd been disgusted enough to forward it to someone who knew someone who sat on Mark's company's board. The board member had questions about whether someone who would orchestrate such cruelty represented their corporate values. While Mark's world crumbled, mine began to bloom in ways I'd forgotten were possible. The first thing I did was repaint the living room. Not dove gray, which Mark had called depressing, but a warm butter yellow that caught the morning sun and made the space feel alive. The bedroom became a soft sage green. The kitchen backsplash got the hand-painted tiles I'd admired for years, but Mark had deemed unnecessarily artistic. I hung the abstract paintings I'd bought at street fairs and hidden in closets, the ones Mark called pretentious garbage. The expensive coffee maker I'd wanted, the one that ground beans and steamed milk and made mornings feel special, took proud position on the counter. Plants appeared on every surface, pothos trailing from bookshelves, a fiddle leaf fig by the window, herbs growing in the kitchen window that I actually used instead of letting them brown. Laura started coming by on Wednesdays with the twins. No invitation needed. We'd drink wine while the boys played, and she'd tell me things she'd held back for years. "I wanted to say something at your wedding," she admitted one evening. "The way he corrected your vows during the ceremony. I should have known then." Book club resumed on Tuesday nights. 5 women who'd gradually stopped inviting me because Mark always had comments about my absence the next day. They welcomed me back without questions, though Bethany did say, "You look like yourself again. I hadn't realized how much you'd disappeared." The red cocktail dress came out of exile for Jessica's birthday party in mid-January, the one Mark said made me look desperate for attention. I wore it to a rooftop bar where I laughed without calculating the volume, told stories without checking if they were boring, and danced until my feet hurt. No one commented on my desperation. They commented on my joy. 3 months later, in late March, I sat in Jessica's conference room as the divorce was finalized. Mark appeared diminished, wearing a suit that needed pressing, his hair longer than he'd ever worn it when appearances mattered. His lawyer, a budget attorney who specialized in quick divorces, tried to argue emotional distress. Jessica's response was surgical. She presented recordings of Mark calling me pathetic, worthless, and nothing without him. She submitted the email planning my public humiliation, the conspiracy with Chris to record my breakdown, the evidence of financial abuse and hidden assets. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, listened to everything without expression. 70% of marital assets to Mrs. Morrison, she ruled. The building ownership remains with Helen Holdings, LLC. Additional damages of $30,000 for documented emotional abuse. The restraining order preventing contact will remain in place. Mark stood when it was over, his mouth opening as if to speak, then closing again. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, his shoulders curved inward, the confident posture that had once commanded rooms completely gone. He left without looking at me, shuffling toward the elevator while his lawyer muttered about appeals they both knew wouldn't happen. "How do you feel?" Jessica asked as we watched him disappear. I thought about it, really considered the question. "Free," I said finally, like I can breathe for the first time in 7 years. The apartment was mine now, legally and spiritually. Every corner reflected choices I'd made, colors I'd chosen, the life I'd built. Friends came without needing permission or explanation. I cooked elaborate meals or ordered takeout without commentary on my domestic skills. I woke up each morning in sheets I'd selected, surrounded by art I loved, drinking coffee exactly how I wanted it. New Year's Eve arrived 9 months after that Christmas dinner. I hosted a party, my first real party in the space that was entirely mine. Jessica came with her new boyfriend. Laura brought her family. My parents arrived early to help set up. Even Susan from Mark's former company stopped by, having become an unexpected friend after reaching out to apologize for not speaking up sooner. As midnight approached, I stepped onto the balcony with a champagne flute, watching the city prepare for fireworks. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Megan. I heard what you did at Christmas. Thank you for saving me from making your mistake. He would have destroyed me too." I read it once, then I deleted it without responding. Megan's gratitude belonged to her, but I hadn't done any of it for her. I'd done it for the woman who'd stood frozen in a hallway holding a coffee pot, listening to her worth being bet against like a losing horse. The fireworks exploded across the sky in bursts of gold and silver and red. Below, the city celebrated new beginnings, fresh starts, the death of one year and the birth of another. I raised my champagne to the lights, to the cold air that didn't make me shrink, to the sound of laughter from my apartment full of people who knew my worth had never been negotiable. The woman they'd bet would fall apart stood on a balcony she owned, in a building she'd bought, living a life she'd rebuilt from the foundation up. I hadn't followed their script, or anyone else's. The story was mine now, and I was still writing it. If this story of calculated revenge left you feeling satisfied, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Ava slid that gold-wrapped box across the table, watching Mark's face change as he realized who'd really been in control. What was your favorite moment? Tell me in the comments below. For more stories of sweet justice and powerful comebacks, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. End of story.